So how do we define the state? Well, looking at state power, what we mean by state power is the ability of the state to accomplish basic objectives, to defend the borders, to ensure order, to efficiently collect revenue and allocate that revenue. And there are two definitions that you need to know. Capacity, which is the ability to carry out basic tasks of providing security and reconciling freedom and equality. And the other term is autonomy, the ability of the state to wield its power independently of the public. And usually what we focus on here is sovereignty. We refer to sovereignty as the notion that they can govern themselves without external pressures. And here we're talking about internal pressures. So the domestic public is what we mean by autonomy, public control. So going back to capacity, capacity refers to state capabilities. Capabilities to carry out actions and policies within a territory independent from external actors or internal rivals. So they serve as the primary authority which can create and execute laws and regulations. They resist outside interference. They ensure order and stability at home. That's what the state does. That's what states do. This, of course, necessitates power. Power to fight off external and internal threats. Other state actors as well as non-state actors, whether rebels, organized crime groups, terrorists from inside or outside. All of these can be external or internal. This vague notion of power is made concrete through institutions. Police, military, tax collectors, everyone who comes together, all these institutions come together to create the state. While governments rise and fall, the state, as a set of institutions, is much more enduring. It can change shape very gradually, or occasionally be closed down, or joined by new institutions, or adopt different philosophies, but it tends to be persistent over time. This is the political machinery. Unlike regimes. Strong states are those that are able to provide public goods. They've got the capacity to do this. They're also able to limit public goods without consequence. They've got what we call high autonomy. And there's also the ability to maintain public acceptance, which is legitimacy. And so we'll get into that in just a second. But regimes refer to those fundamental rules and norms of politics that incorporate long-term goals and describe the locus of power and how it should be used. So regime refers to who's at the center of power and how power is used. Okay? And states are the set of institutions that generate policy. So governments inevitably pursue short-term goals, but they're constrained by the norms and values of the existing regime, as well as the capabilities of the state. So the existing regime. And so we're going to talk about regime types. And I actually take a separate set of slides to get into regime types. I know these have been short, but I like to keep them. Oh, you know what? So short, I'm going to keep it going right here. So Schmitter and Carl, from your readings, define regimes as a regime as the patterns that determine the methods of access to the principal public offices, the characteristics of the actors admitted to or excluded from such access, the strategies that actors may use to gain access, and the rules that are followed in the making of publicly binding decisions. So all this is part of their definition. And today we're going to discuss two types, democratic and non-democratic regimes. Now note that according to Carl and Schmitter, compared to non-democracies, democracies are not necessarily more economically efficient. They're not necessarily more administratively efficient, or more orderly, or consensual, or stable, or governable, or even more open economically. They can be protectionist. So what are they? Well, Olson uses an intellectually appealing and very colorful image to get this point across in his theory of the roving bandit, which I alluded to in an earlier section. Now, starting at zero, anarchy, what do you have? You've got a system characterized by violence and theft. There is no security of life or property. As a result, people living in the society have no motivation to produce cars, guns, corn, bread, whatever, because they know that there's little likelihood that they're actually going to profit from their labor. On the other hand, if there's no production, then there's nothing for the roving bandit to steal. So for the roving bandit coming in fresh, you've got all these things that are going on. You've got commerce, you've got production. You can steal it all, and that's great for a little while, until people catch on that that's just not going to work for them. In other words, they have no stake in the system. So in sum, it's in the interests of both the roving bandits and the population at large to bring some sort of order into the equation. and hence we've got the state. The state is a roving bandit transformed into a stationary bandit. It's self-defeating for the roving bandit to wander around pillaging and ravaging his own society, since quickly there's going to be nothing left to pick from. And so this rational stationary bandit operates differently. The stationary bandit routinely collects dues from its citizens, but ensures that these dues are not in excess of what the people need to continue to themselves prosper. So he wants to make sure that people continue to prosper themselves. If the stationary bandit successfully monopolizes theft within his domain, then his victims have no worry that other bandits are going to be coming through. In other words, he's maximizing external protection. And they live in the security of knowing whom they will pay and how much, as well as when they will pay. So the stationary bandit has guaranteed for them some degree of stability, and he's guaranteed himself a future pot of gold, well into the future. The stationary bandit then is a rational, self-interested leader. He takes a portion of what he steals and reinvests it in his land or in his country in ways that will increase prosperity, and therefore increase his own cut. Roads, to ensure goods make it to market, and his own tax collectors and police can maintain order and payment of obligations. Schools, to make his people more innovative and more prosperous. Healthcare systems, to keep his people healthy and productive, stop epidemics, etc. Social security, to motivate people to work towards an end. Right? The end being this pot of gold at the end. Human rights. Human rights are a tough one. Human rights are respected to the degree that the stationary bandit needs the people to feel secure. Think about emigres. Think about the brain drain. If you have not enough security, if people see that they could have more security somewhere else, they're going to go to that other place if they can. And this brings us to the next point, which is that not all stationary bandits are alike. And here we'll get to regime type. Political leaders in non-democracies and democracies have a very different incentive structure, which can impact the degree to which they respect human rights of their subjects. In both democracies and non-democracies, political leaders are oriented towards survival. That survival is their number one goal, as cynical as this may sound. Right? They want to remain in power, by and large. There are occasional outliers who are the good ones. But by and large, this is what they do. It's something about our thirst for power. Look, if you look in many democracies, you see millionaires trading their fortune for a piece of power and glory. Ross Perot is a great example of that. Back in the early 1990s, he put, I don't even know how much, millions and millions of dollars into his own election campaign so that he could go off and be president and earn, $400,000 or $500,000 a year. In many developing countries, there's a much stronger correlation between power and wealth. Because if you're a dictator, and you, along with your pack, lose your job, what are you going to do? Go into the bazaar like most of your countrymen and sell watermelons? So there's a strong correlation between power and wealth, especially in a dictatorship. Now, in democracies, leaders are chosen through some sort of public input. So these are the Democratic bandits. They're chosen either directly by the people. We choose parliamentary representatives. In a presidential system, we choose the president and many others lower down, including even judges when we go off and vote, in the United States in particular, or indirectly, like prime ministers in a parliamentary democracy. The prime minister is chosen by the representatives who the people have chosen. People choose the members of parliament, and the members of parliament decide who's going to govern the state. In all democratic forms, though, there's a relatively short path from the from the people to the source of power. And here you've got notions of accountability. They feel this. The leaders feel this. If you write a letter to your senator, it will be read, probably by an intern, earning no money, but it will be read and responded to. And maybe it'll be picked out and actually handed over to your senator, if it's particularly important or pressing. So let's look at competition in the context of the bandit metaphor. Schmitter and Carl refer to competition as a necessary evil in democracy. It's good in that it leads to leaders striving their best to serve their public, but it's bad in that it creates factions that need to be balanced. People whose support the leaders need, are referred to as the winning coalition. And there are two ways to win support. You can provide private goods or public goods. Let me just say again, the winning coalition, all we mean when we talk about the term winning coalition are those people whose support you need to maintain power. So in a democracy, we're probably talking about, well, 50% plus one of the voters, right? So that's who we're talking about. So, two ways to win support: the provision of private goods and public goods. Private goods are those goods and services that are granted to an individual. I'll give you an expensive car. I'll give you a ticket to Fiji, right? Maybe high-level positions in the government or state-owned businesses in return for your support for me being leader. Public goods, which I mentioned before, are non-excludable. They're non-divisible. They're available to anyone. Roads, schools, hospitals. No one wants to pay for these. No one can pay for these. But everyone expects for it to be provided. Everyone benefits from them. And this is ascribed to the government's list of duties. It's in the realm of public policy. A large winning coalition is impossible to satisfy with private goods. I can't provide, me as the leader of a state with a large winning coalition, I can't provide everyone with an expensive car. Right? The logical solution is to provide public goods. So instead of providing every person with a car, which I can't afford, I promise better schools, better healthcare, better roads, better security. And then to at least a certain degree, I have to go through with these promises in order to win re-election, the notion of accountability. So we'll stop here and we'll look at non-democratic bandits in a moment.